I'm Alvina, a 34-year-old stay-at-home mom, living with my husband, Morris, and our 2 elementary school-aged daughters. We share a property with my in-laws, making us a household of 6. Before we got married, I used to work night shifts, but Morris suggested I quit, saying, "I'd rather you stop working if it means we won't see each other as much." So, I left my job and dedicated myself to raising our children, later picking up part-time work once things became more manageable. Initially, I wasn't thrilled about the idea of living with my in-laws. At the time, I didn't really know what kind of people they were, and regardless of how nice they seemed, I knew living with in-laws could be stressful. So, when Morris assured me before our marriage that we wouldn't have to live with his parents, I felt relieved. But shortly after we got married, Morris brought up the idea of living on the same property as his parents, saying, "I'm worried about them. What if we lived on the same property? We wouldn't be in the same house." I was taken aback and voiced my concerns, but Morris countered, "Do you dislike my parents that much? We'd be living separately, just close enough to help if needed. If our situations were reversed, wouldn't you want to live with your parents?" His argument left me without much to say. My parents were still healthy, living with my brother and his wife, so I had no reason to suggest living with them. Perhaps that's why Morris felt comfortable saying, if it were the other way around, I'd live with them, even though I hadn't fully agreed. Morris soon informed me, "My parents have already started building a house on our property. There's no turning back now." And just like that, we were committed to this arrangement. Although I was unhappy about the situation, I managed to set one condition: we wouldn't interfere in each other's lives. Thus, our shared property living arrangement began. My in-laws respected the agreement, and we led mostly separate lives, with me joining them for meals once or twice a week. The house they built on our property was beautiful, and I even started to think that this might have been a lucky turn of events since we would eventually inherit it. However, I soon realized that was a big mistake. My mother-in-law gradually began to break our initial agreement. At first, her requests seemed reasonable. She would stop by once or twice a week and ask for help with things like, "My back is hurting a bit, could you carry this?" Or, "I'm not feeling well today, could you prepare dinner?" These seemed fair enough, so I didn't mind helping. But as time went on, her requests turned into demands, like, "Is breakfast ready yet?" and "Why hasn't our part of the house been cleaned?" She started acting as if it was my responsibility to handle all the housework. Before I knew it, I was cooking all 3 meals and cleaning not just our house, but theirs as well. Morris didn't say anything about this, only my father-in-law would occasionally apologize, saying, "Sorry for always asking you to do this." Sometimes he would offer me snacks, saying, "I know it's not much, but please enjoy this." My mother-in-law's interference didn't stop at housework. She also began meddling in how we raised our children. She'd say things like, "They should take these lessons," or criticize, "It's strange that your 2 girls don't help with housework. What did you have 2 girls for?" Yet, whenever she lashed out, my father-in-law would step in to defend me. "Remember, we agreed to manage our respective homes," he would remind her. She'd then offer a surface-level apology, saying, "Oh, right, I forgot. I guess I'm just feeling weak and unwell, so I might have leaned on you too much. I'm sorry." But as soon as my father-in-law wasn't around, the harassment would start again. When I tried to talk to Morris about how this wasn't what we agreed on, he brushed it off, saying, "Even if you made an agreement at first, we're family, aren't we? We should be flexible when times get tough. It's your fault for not handling it well." I spent my days increasingly frustrated. Then, out of the blue, my mother-in-law collapsed at home. We called an ambulance, but she passed away from a sudden seizure. I couldn't bring myself to say it aloud, but part of me felt relieved that the harassment was finally over. Despite her constant interference, my father-in-law had always been kind to me, and I felt differently towards him. I did my best to care for him after her passing. He would often thank me, saying, "I'm sorry for breaking our agreement not to interfere. I just can't manage the housework on my own. Thank you so much." Our daughters adored their gentle grandfather, and we finally began to spend many peaceful days together. But sadly, this peace was short-lived. Just a few months after my mother-in-law's passing, my father-in-law suddenly collapsed as well. Although he survived, he was left bedridden and in need of constant care. During a discussion about his care, my father-in-law expressed his desire to go to a nursing home to avoid being a burden, but Morris immediately stepped in, saying, "Don't say that, Dad. Family is supposed to take care of each other, Nursing homes are only for when there's no other option. Alvina said she's okay with taking care of you, he added, catching me completely off guard. I did care deeply for my father-in-law, and I wanted to help him in any way I could, even if he went to a nursing home. I had planned to visit him often, but providing full-time care at home was a completely different challenge. It was clear that Morris wouldn't be helping, and as a stay-at-home mom with young children to look after, taking on the responsibility of caring for my father-in-law would be overwhelming. However, I couldn't express my hesitation in front of him. He was not like my mother-in-law. With no real choice, I agreed to take on his care. As I feared, caregiving was incredibly demanding. I had to assist him with meals, bathroom visits, and bathing. My father-in-law was still a strong man, and being of the opposite sex, there were moments of discomfort for both of us. My daily routine became a never-ending cycle of preparing the kids for school, doing housework, caring for my father-in-law, managing the kids after school, and preparing dinner. By the end of each day, I would collapse into bed, thinking, I somehow made it through another day. Morris, instead of offering any help with his father's care, started spending even less time at home, using work as an excuse. He claimed to have overnight shifts and only returned home 2 or 3 times a week. On top of that, because I never knew when he'd actually come home, I struggled to have dinner ready at the right time. On days when I was too exhausted to cook anything elaborate, I would prepare something simple, but even then, Morris would rage, I'm working my tail off, and this is the thanks I get. When I asked for a little help around the house or with caring for his father, he snapped, you're a full-time homemaker, aren't you? Taking care of my father is your job. Every day felt like a struggle. This distressing situation dragged on for 3 long years. As my 2 daughters grew older, they began to help with the housework and caring for their grandfather, which eased some of the burden. Chantel helped daily with cooking and cleaning, while Janie would tenderly wipe her grandfather's back, asking, does that feel good, Grandpa? I was incredibly grateful to have such compassionate daughters. One day, Morris accidentally left his mobile phone at home when he went to work. Despite knowing it was wrong, I couldn't resist the urge to look through it. His password was his birthday, so I unlocked it easily. What I discovered was a series of devastating revelations. Unbelievably, Morris had been having an affair since around the time I started caring for his father, and they even had a child together. From their text messages, it became clear that Morris was also financially supporting his mistress. Despite telling me he was saving money for our children's future, he hadn't saved a dime. The messages got even worse. My kid's already in elementary school, so he's not cute anymore, and caring for the old man is a pain. But thank God for my idiot wife. It's a waste of money to put him in a care facility, but having my wife do it is free. Gotta make use of free labor, right? LOL. He was mocking me and our children behind our backs. Under normal circumstances, I would have stayed calm and gathered solid evidence before confronting him, but I was too furious to keep my composure. The moment Morris stepped out of the bath, I shoved his phone in his face and demanded, what is this about? At first, Morris looked a bit startled, but he quickly regained his composure. You've lost your femininity since having our kids, he said, his voice dripping with scorn. You stopped wearing makeup, and your clothes are all about comfort. Ever since you started breastfeeding our second child and falling asleep with your mouth open, I felt completely turned off. Then, when you began taking care of my dad, you lost even more of your femininity. You're not even a middle-aged woman anymore, you're more like a middle-aged man. His cruel words cut deep, but he didn't stop there. You know, my girlfriend always wears makeup and takes care of her appearance, even after having a child. He continued coldly, I have no intention of divorcing you, for appearance's sake, but my love is with her and our child. I don't know who will go first, but once my dad passes and our kids are grown, I plan to kick you out and live in this house with her. He kept spewing venom, making it clear he saw me as nothing more than trash. Even though he pretended to care about the children, I couldn't hold back my tears any longer. I want to dress up and wear makeup too, but you never helped with the kids or the housework. I had to manage everything on my own, juggling unfamiliar childcare and trying to keep the house in order. I did my best, even if it meant my hair got messy. If you wanted me to look beautiful, why didn't you help with the housework, the kids, or even caring for your father? Shouldn't a husband and father naturally step in and help? I pleaded through my tears, but my words fell on deaf ears. That's not true. Look at other women. They stay beautiful while raising their kids. Like I've told you many times, it's just that you're not efficient. You're a stay-at-home mom, so you have no right to argue with me, the one who's putting food on the table, he retorted coldly. If you're so unhappy, you can always divorce me, but for a woman in her mid-30s like you, job opportunities are scarce, aren't they? Do you really think you can raise our 2 kids just because you'll get a bit of alimony and child support from me? He sneered. I was struck so deeply by his words that I couldn't muster a response. The thought of my children held me back from considering divorce. Seeing my hesitation, Morris smirked and said, "You can't, can you? If you care about the kids, you'll take care of my father until the end. After that, you can continue as my housekeeper. Don't worry, when the kids are older, they'll help you out, so you'd better treat them well." He then retreated to his room, looking smug. I stood there, stunned and unable to move. Eventually, I gathered myself and went to care for my father-in-law. I tried to act as if nothing was wrong, but he noticed. "Is something bothering you?" he asked. I tried to dismiss it, saying, "No, nothing at all," but I couldn't hold back my tears, and everything came pouring out. After listening, he said, "Alvina, I have something for you. Can you come back in a few hours?" I did as he asked, and when I returned, he handed me a piece of paper with contact information on it. "Get in touch with this person," he said. "They know everything. I should be the one taking action, but given my condition." He smiled warmly despite everything. A few days later, Morris announced, "As I mentioned before, I'll be on a business trip for a week. Although, for your sake, let's just call it a business trip, okay?" I saw this as my chance to take action. A week later, Morris called me, furious and frantic. "What the hell is going on? I come home, and everything is gone." "Oh my, how was your week-long affair? Did you enjoy it?" I replied coolly. "Stop messing around. I'm asking what happened," he shouted. I calmly explained. The contact my father-in-law had given me was for Mr. Corey, an old friend of his and a prominent landowner in the area. Mr. Corey had always been interested in the land where my in-laws' house stood and had repeatedly tried to buy it, but my father-in-law had always refused, saying, "I plan to leave it to my son." However, after seeing Morris's behavior and hearing my story, he decided his son wasn't worthy of the inheritance. We knew in advance that Morris was planning this business trip because he didn't bother to hide his affair. Before he left, I met with Mr. Corey, and we arranged to sell the house and land. Mr. Corey had coveted the property for years, so he was willing to pay well above market value. During the week Morris was away, the house was demolished. My father-in-law had asked Mr. Corey, given the circumstances, could you have the demolition done during that week? So when Morris returned, all he found was an empty lot, and with the money from selling the old house and land, "We're going to build a new house," I said. Morris, looking worried, tried to reason with me. "But you're jobless, aren't you? Even if Dad builds a house, you can't expect to be supported forever. What will you do without my income? It's going to be tough, right?" I responded calmly. "Don't worry about that." I had some concerns, but my father-in-law and Mr. Corey have made significant arrangements. I've even received a job offer from a company run by an acquaintance who's looking to hire. So, I'm not as helpless as you might think. Then I asked, "Shouldn't you be more concerned about yourself?" Morris, puzzled, asked, "What do you mean?" I explained. "The company where you work got you your job because the president is a friend of your father's. But now that your father has severed ties with you, he's informed the president. He said, if his work is poor and he's committing adultery, feel free to fire him." The president responded, "It's been difficult to address, but he's been acting as if he can't be fired and causing trouble. Let's see how things go starting tomorrow." On the other end of the line, all I heard was a stunned, "What?" followed by silence. Morris then tried to excuse himself, saying, "Well, I might have said some things out of anger, like planning to leave you in the future, but that can't be true. Don't take it seriously. We're family. We should stick together. Can't you help mediate between me and Dad?" I replied firmly, "My family now is my daughters and my father-in-law. Goodbye," and hung up. Morris made several attempts to call me afterward, but I ignored them all. Eventually, my divorce from Morris was finalized. I pursued compensation from both Morris and his mistress, armed with ample evidence of his affair. Given that Morris hadn't tried to conceal his infidelity, I was able to gather information from various sources, including the president of Morris's company, who was a friend of my father-in-law. Surprisingly, Morris's affair wasn't the only issue. He was also caught embezzling company funds to support his double life. As a result, he was not only fired but also faced a lawsuit for damages. He lost his job and home, and his mistress abandoned him once she realized he had no money. To make matters worse, he's now responsible for paying child support. Morris now spends his days job hunting and working multiple part-time jobs to cover his debts and child support obligations. As for me, I'm living with my daughters and father-in-law in a rented house until we can move into the new home that my father-in-law is building for us. When he offered to build the house, he said, "I'm moving into a care facility. I want you and your daughters to be happy here." "Alvina," I replied, "what are you talking about, Dad? We're family. Besides, it would make the girls sad. Let's live together." Touched by this, my daughters joined in, saying, "We want to live with Grandpa." With tears in his eyes, my father-in-law expressed his gratitude. While the girls help out, balancing caregiving with work is challenging. We are currently enjoying our life as a family of 4 with the assistance of home aides and day services. We look forward to moving into our new home and starting this new chapter together.